Raymond Edward Yeilding was born in 1949 and was raised in Florence, Alabama. In his youth, he became an Eagle Scout before graduating from Coffee High School. He attended Auburn University seeking a bachelor's in science and electrical engineering, while also participating in the Air Force's Reserve Officer Training Corps. He received a commission and spent the next 23 years flying aircraft such as the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom, the Gulfstream C-20, and of course, the famed SR-71 Blackbird. Yeilding flew the SR-71 for 6 years. His service included classified missions, serving as an instructor, and flying a record-breaking flight from Los Angeles, California to Washington, D.C. in only 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 20 seconds. After his career in the Air Force, Yeilding flew as an airline pilot for Northwest Airlines. Since his retirement, Yeilding has shared his love for aviation by giving guest talks at universities and events around the country. So I hope you all join me in giving a warm welcome to Ed Yeilding.
Thank you, Dimitri. It's really good to be here today, and I appreciate you guys coming out on a Friday afternoon. Hope you all have had a good week. It's really fortunate to get to fly the SR-71 Blackbird. Beautiful airplane. It's all been declassified now, so I can tell you all about it. It served our country for 25 years, from 1964 until it was retired in 1990. Then after it retired in 1990, NASA got permission to fly for research until 1999. So it last flew in 1999. But as a boy, at 15 years old, I was interested in flying the airplane, and so I'll tell you quickly how I got there. That's what I looked like at 15 when President Johnson first announced the existence of the airplane. I thought, man, I'd like to fly that plane someday. So it was really a dream come true. Let's see. And all of a sudden, it's not advancing. I'm not even able to advance it with my computer buttons. Yeah. Thank you, Dimitri. So, I went to Auburn and majored in electrical engineering. I was also in Air Force ROTC at the time, and they pinned on my second lieutenant bars when I graduated from Auburn. One of my instructors at Auburn, he was a Major Jimmy Adams at the time. I remember he said, I sure like working with you guys, but this ROTC assignment is really not good for my career. He wound up making 4 stars and was a commander of PACAF over all the airplanes in the Pacific when he retired. I told him one time, I said, well, if you just hadn't had that ROTC assignment, you would have been chief of staff. So I went to pilot training and did really well in the T-38. Really enjoyed flying the T-37, T-38. I did well in pilot training and near the top of my class, and one reason was I had, besides studying hard, I had a really good instructor, Brian Weatherly, who was right here, and I kept in touch with Brian through the years until he died of cancer just a few years ago, but he was a really great instructor. So being near the top of the class, I was able to choose my assignment, and I chose the RF-4, and that was back in 1973. That was before the F-15 and F-16 were available yet. But I really enjoyed flying the F-4 Phantom. I flew it for 9 years. I started off flying the RF-4, and our mission was primarily low altitude, high speed photography. Then after 5.5 years in the RF-4, I was able to transition to the F-4 fighter. This is my flight over in Okinawa. I'm kneeling on the far right side back in 1979. Proud of all these guys, and we still keep in touch. The tall lieutenant on the far left, Kevin Chilton, extra proud of him. He was a lieutenant in this picture, but he wound up later becoming an astronaut, and he went back into the active duty Air Force after being an astronaut. He's the only astronaut to ever be promoted to 4-star general, and he retires as 4-star general. Pretty proud of Kevin. He's really good about keeping his friendship with us, even though he vastly outranks us. So then I transitioned to F-4 fighter, and I was never in combat, but we trained hard for combat to be ready to serve our country at a moment's notice. And I really enjoyed the bombing competitions that we had for accuracy, and especially enjoyed the air-to-air tactics in the F-4. Then, and my flight commander in the F-4 was Tim Anderson, standing behind his dad right here. I'm going to show you that picture because his dad, Bud Anderson, was Chuck Yeager's best friend in World War II, and Bud just passed away just over a year ago at age 102. He was the last remaining triple ace in the world. Triple ace means he had more than 15 kills during World War II. He had just 16 and a half kills. One of our real heroes. Then after a total of 9 years in the Phantom, I applied and was selected to fly the SR-71 Blackbird, the world's fastest, highest flying airplane. Love flying the airplane. Well, I've enjoyed all the airplanes I've flown. And just after I got to Beale Air Force Base, where we were stationed north of Sacramento, Chuck Yeager came out in 1983. One of the generals had given him permission to get a back seat or a front seat ride in the trainer version of the SR-71, and he spent a little time talking to us in the lobby. You know, Chuck Yeager was the very first human to ever go faster than sound, 1947. And he too passed away just a few years ago, nearly 100 years old. The SR-71, highest flying, fastest airplane, so it holds the records for speed for level flight and altitude for level flight. So as old as the airplane is, it still holds those speed and altitude records for level flight. Our max altitude was 85,000 feet, Mach 3.3, and you can see at 85,000 feet, it's only 15 or 16 miles high, but still you can see slight curvature on the earth, but more noticeable than the curvature was how dark it was overhead, because we were above 97% of the air molecules. So our top speed was Mach 3.3, so you may wonder how fast that is. That's faster than a rifle bullet, 30-06 rifle bullet. Now, 3.3 times the speed of sound. The speed of sound depends on temperature, so that equation will tell you what the speed of sound is if you know the temperature in Celsius. Now down near the ground, on a typical day like today, the speed of sound is going to be pretty close to 760 miles an hour. But up at near 80,000 feet where we were flying, the temperature is minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit, or minus 56.5 centigrade. And so the speed of sound was a little slower because the air molecules are bouncing around slower, so the speed of sound is slower. And it was about 660 miles per hour. So if you multiply the top speed, Mach 3.3 times 660, you get 2,178 miles per hour. It's about the speed, and that's about 36 miles per minute, or about 1 mile every 1.65 seconds. So we had a gauge that told us how many miles to the next turn point, and those miles were clicking off one every just over a second and a half for each mile. Now, you know, a supersonic airplane leaves a a shock wave, three-dimensional shock wave. You know, the boat leaves a two-dimensional shock wave in the water, a wake. The boat will leave a wake in the water once it gets to a certain speed. So once an airplane gets to the speed of sound, it leaves a cone or a wake, three-dimensional wake cone. So everybody that's underneath that cone as we fly by, when that shock wave passes them, all of a sudden they hear boom. Sometimes they'll hear a double boom because there'll be a shock wave off the nose and maybe a shock wave off the wing. Now, the SR-71 that I flew was a two-seat Blackbird. Most of the Blackbirds were two-seat SR-71 Blackbirds. So the pilot was in the front, and the navigator, his position was called Reconnaissance Systems Officer, and he sat in the back seat. He had control of the cameras and the navigation. The earliest version Blackbirds were single-seat Blackbirds, and they have a single-seat Blackbird in front of the Rocket Center here in Huntsville. It's being repainted now. As I drove by it a little earlier, I didn't see it on display. It used to be right in the front, so I'm not sure where they have it temporarily right now, but they have plans to mount the Blackbird at the Rocket Center. And it's a single-seat Blackbird. The earliest version Blackbirds were made in 1962, and they were flown by the CIA. It was called the A-12. And once the SR-71 started flying, they retired all the A-12s, and the Air Force took over that mission with the SR-71 Blackbird. So the Blackbirds were built by the Skunk Works section of Lockheed. And this one of my heroes, Kelly Johnson, was the primary designer of the Blackbird. Now, he didn't do it by himself. He led a team of about 80, but he was the visionary behind the Blackbird. One of my heroes. Read his autobiography, really an interesting autobiography. He was never rated as a pilot, but he made sure that he got flights in all the airplanes that he designed as a flight test engineer. He told about his boyhood. He grew up in a low-income family in Upper Michigan, and he, as a boy, enjoyed reading all the Tom Swift books at the library, and he decided he was going to be like Tom Swift and design amazing machines, and he did. So he was raised in the Upper Peninsula, and then during his junior college years, his family moved to Flint, Michigan. He went to community college in Flint, Michigan. Then later got his 4-year degree at the University of Michigan. I met his stepson, John Horgan, became one of my friends, and John invited me over to his house, and he showed me drawings that young Kelly Johnson made when he was just 13 years old. And so Kelly Johnson was born in 1910, and when he was 13 years old, it was 1923, and so these were state-of-the-art visions of his back in 1923. John showed me young Kelly's scrapbook that he made when he was 12 and 13 years old. Some of the drawings that he blew up for his the hallway in his house. But I got a real kick out of this page. This is an article that Kelly put in his scrapbook that said, the French has just taken the airplane speed records from the Americans at 278 miles an hour. And you can just see that young Kelly would notice. You can just imagine young Kelly thinking, that is just unacceptable, and I'm going to design an airplane someday that'll break that record. And he did. Besides being an outstanding engineer, he was an outstanding manager as well. So I think that combination of engineering and management is what helped make Kelly Johnson one of the most successful aeronautical engineers in our history. Show you some of the planes that he designed. The P-38 fighter that was very important during World War II. Matter of fact, our two leading aces of World War II, Dick Vaughn and Tom McGuire, Dick had 40 kills, and all of these kills were with Kelly Johnson's T-38, and Tom McGuire had 38 kills. But there were a total of 1,900 Japanese enemy fighters shot down by the T-38 during World War II. So Kelly Johnson played an important role in us winning World War II. And toward the end of the World War II, he came out with his a fighter airplane, America's first operational fighter jet. And it even made the front page of the Life magazine as America's first jet fighter. And you can see it's 1945. Those magazines were 10 cents a piece. Then he designed the F-104, the U-2 spy plane. And I was 11 years old when the U-2 spy plane was shot down over Russia in 1960. And by the way, I saw really an excellent movie on that Bridge of Spies. And the movie was a lot better than I thought it would be about the airplane being shot down over Russia. Really an interesting story, Bridge of Spies. Anyway, Kelly said, well, I'm going to design an airplane that's too high and too fast to be shot down. Now, his crowning achievement of the beautiful and at the time the mysterious SR-71 Blackbird. The main design challenges designing an airplane so fast was heat on the airplane. So even though it was cruising minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit weather, friction on the airplane caused the skin to average 550 degrees Fahrenheit. So the heat on the airplane was a real challenge. Aluminum alloys, which most airplanes are built from, get too soft at that high temperature. So they pioneered the use of titanium in designing and building the airplane. And here you can see that titanium is one of the lightest of the transition metals, and it can take that high temperature. And he and his engineers built it primarily using slide rules. My engineering class of 1972 was one of the last engineering classes not to have pocket calculators. So all my engineering training was with the slide rules. And that's what Kelly Johnson's engineers used in designing the Blackbird. Now I've got a little TI-84 and a TI-89, and I'm just amazed at what all those little handheld pocket calculators can do. So the airplane also has a reputation for leaking fuel. The airplane would expand about 4 inches during the flight due to the heat, and then when it landed, it would contract. And there were expansion joints built in the airplane. But when it landed, it leaked fuel. Now, the places where the fuel would leak from were coated with a material, with a putty-like substance, which would keep it from leaking, but that material would get hot and brittle over time and would crack, and the airplane would start leaking more and more and more. And so eventually they would go in and reseal those panels to keep it from leaking. Now they told me that all that fuel, I'd go out to fly the airplane, and be a big puddle of fuel underneath the airplane, and they said it was not dangerous. They said the fuel is a special fuel. JP7 had a real high flash point. And it was hard to light. They told me you could hold a match to the fuel on the ground and it would not ignite. And I never did actually try that, but that's what they claimed. So to start engines, we would get a shot of TEB and triethylchlorane, and that TEB would start burning. As soon as it came in contact with oxygen, it would burn hot enough to light the fuel. So every time we lit the afterburner, we give it a shot of Tab to light the afterburner. Another precaution was as we burned fuel out of the fuel tanks, they didn't want the heat of the airplane to ignite the fuel inside the fuel tanks. So as we burned fuel, that space in the fuel tanks was filled with nitrogen. Nitrogen forms a double bond. So there's two atoms of nitrogen to make a molecule of nitrogen. And it's practically inert. So having that nitrogen in the fuel tanks would keep the fuel from burning in the fuel tanks. So we go out to fly the airplane, and the airplane would be smoking. It would be giving off some of this nitrogen. Now, the very first test pilot to fly the airplane was Bob Gilliland. And when I dreamed of flying the airplane when I was 15 years old and had heard about its first flight in 1964, I never dreamed that the first test pilot, Bob Yeilding, would become one of my best friends. Even though 22 years older, he took an interest in me, and we became really good friends. Very first test pilot to fly the airplane. He was from Memphis, and I think that's another reason we got along so well. He's from the South, like I was. But he lived primarily in California. He had a long, great career. There's a biography on Bob Gilliland there as well, real interesting. And they asked me to be the technical advisor on that book because Bob passed away in 2019. This flattened area along the fuselage is called the chine, and the chine provided lift for the forward fuselage, and it also carried some of our cameras and reconnaissance equipment. On each wing was Pratt & Whitney J58 engines, 34,000 pounds of thrust apiece. The jet engines are really interesting. That's the compressor blades at the intake of the engine. You see that the engines are really interesting, and our maintenance people did a great job keeping the engines running really well. Now you can see those black tubes at the middle of the engine. As the airplane accelerated through Mach 2.0, there were valves that would start to open and route compressed air from the fourth stage of the compressor around the combustion chamber and directly into the afterburner. So it gave the engine a ramjet effect. It was not a true ramjet, but it gave it a ramjet effect, routing the compressed air directly into the afterburner. That's the afterburner section, and you can see the ceramic material to guard against heat to the metal. Here's an engine on the S-band, and you see the bright spots in the exhaust caused by supersonic airflow in the exhaust. It was really neat to see the airplane with the afterburner at night and see those shock times. So in front of each engine was a cone or a spike, and that spike would withdraw into the inlet. The faster we went, it would withdraw as much as 26 inches during the flight and position the shock wave in just the right position of the throat of the inlet. There were bypass doors. That shock wave had to be, it had to be in a real narrow area. If that shock wave got displaced, which it apparently did or would sometimes, we get what's called an unstart. And when we got an unstart, it was not dangerous. All of a sudden we lose about 80% of the thrust on that side. So you'd be flying on, and all of a sudden, boom, and you'd get it felt like a minor explosion. You'd get a sudden yaw on the airplane because of the asymmetric thrust. But again, it wasn't really dangerous. So when we got that unstart, I want to tell you also on the right-hand side of the shock wave, the air was approaching 800 degrees Fahrenheit, and I thought, how could air go from minus 70 to nearly 800 degrees in just a matter of milliseconds? So I found this formula, you know, if you pump air into a bottle, that air is going to be hotter inside the bottle. And so just as a reasonableness check, I found this formula and I just wanted to see, as you compress air going from 0.4 psi, which is about what we were cruising in, to about 17 psi, the temperature in the bottle would be about 673 degrees Fahrenheit. So that was my reasonableness check. You know, as the air goes into the inlet, it's also going by those hot surfaces on the way to the engine. So that unstart, the inlet, the shockwave would be spit out the inlet and sudden yaw on the airplane. Then the spikes, both spikes, would go forward and the bypass doors would open up, and then both spikes would automatically reset in the bypass door. So in about 15 seconds, you're off and running again with the shockwave in the right position. If we had repeated unstarts, we had controls in the cockpit that we could manually position the spikes and the doors to keep the airplane running. When I started flying the airplane in 1984, late 83, we were having about one unstart every other flight. In the early days, they were having an unstart almost every flight. And then by the time the airplane retired in 1990, we refined the software on those inlets so that we were getting about one unstart a year. So when it was retired in 1990, it was flying better than it ever had been. So our mission was reconnaissance, which means we took pictures. We were cruising in dangerous areas of the world, high and fast, so that we couldn't be shot down, keeping a watch on countries that might start hostilities. Our main camera was carried in the nose of the airplane, and we had cameras and reconnaissance systems along the sides of the airplane. That shows you some of our cameras and reconnaissance receivers. When I started flying the airplane in 1984, they were starting to use as a primary camera ASARs in the nose of the airplane instead of that optical camera with that great big lens. And the ASARs, synthetic aperture radar, could get pictures at night and through the weather. So it gave the airplane more usefulness, so we didn't have to worry about whether there was going to be an undercast or day or night. So ASARs became the primary sensor. We were based at Beale Air Force Base, north of Sacramento, and then we would be sent temporary duty to Medina Air Force Base, Okinawa, and then in the other direction be sent to Mildenhall Air Base in England. So from those three locations, we would fly our worldwide reconnaissance missions. In between Blackbird flights at Beale, we all had the T-38 to fly in between Blackbird flights. And it was much cheaper to fly, and would let us keep our pilot skills up, flying instrument procedures, formation flying, and aerobatics. Really enjoyed flying that T-38. That's the same jet, same type of airplane that was also at pilot training when I went through. So the pictures I have of the Blackbird were mostly taken by the T-38 flying in loose formation with the Blackbird when it was close to the Beale Air Force Base. We always flew the Blackbird with a pressure suit because the airplane had its best fuel economy going. My best fuel economy was Mach 3.2 and near 80,000 feet. That was the best fuel economy. So we always flew with a pressure suit. Our cockpit was pressurized to equivalent of 25,000 feet. But if you were to lose cockpit pressure above 63,000 feet, you don't have enough pressure on your body and your blood starts to boil. But you know it always burns your whole day whenever your blood starts boiling. So we wore a pressure suit as a safety backup to losing cockpit pressure. Because our cockpit was at 25,000 feet. We had to breathe pure oxygen during the flight, so you can see the oxygen leads for our breathing. This is Kurt Osterhill, who I was crewed with for a couple of years. Really a great guy. He was from Wisconsin. He was the RSO Reconnaissance Systems officer in the back seat. We might fly our missions any time of day or night because we had that ASAR, so we weren't concerned with where night was. So here we just happened to arrive at the airplane right at sunrise. Now the sun is shining into the hangar, and we had pressure suit experts getting us all hooked up to the airplanes. Seatbelt, parachute, survival kit, air hoses for our pressure suit and oxygen for breathing, and communications leads for our microphone and speakers. And it was hard to get it all hooked up ourselves because we were wearing those thick pressure suit gloves. Gives you an idea of what our cockpit looked like in the early 1960s. They updated the airplane through the years. We get more modern sensors, more modern computers. They switched from analog computers to digital computers while I was flying the airplane. So there are quite a lot of improvements made to the airplane during my years in the Blackbird. I flew it from late 1983 until 1990. But there was never a real need to update the pilot displays. Those old 1960s displays for the pilot worked just fine, so we never did update the pilot displays. Now to start the engine was turned over mechanically with a gear. There were two Buick Wildcat automobile engines hooked in tandem. We turned the jet engine over for starting. So once the rotation started, we could apply fuel and light the afterburner, or light the engine. We would do our pre-flight checks right here in the hangar, and then we would taxi out. It was always really exciting taxiing out in the Blackbird because you pretty soon this amazing airplane is going to take you right up to the edge of space, 3 times faster than sound. So it was always exciting taxiing out. You knew something pretty special was about to happen, this amazing machine. Taxi onto the runway, light the afterburners, real kick in the pants when those afterburners would light, accelerate rapidly down the runway, lift the nose at 180 knots. We lift off at 210 knots, and then climb out at 400 knots. And then we would level off at 25,000 feet and air refuel. It seems funny the first thing we do is air refuel after takeoff. But the reason for that is we always took off with half load of fuel, because if we were fully loaded and lost an engine right at liftoff at slow speed close to the ground, might not be able to control the airplane. So for safety, we took off half loaded of fuel, climbed to 25,000, air refueled, and there, if we were to lose an engine, we're high enough and going fast enough that we could bring the airplane back and land in single engine. So the airplane held 80,000 pounds of fuel with our fuel gauge was in pounds, but that's about 12,000 gallons of fuel. This is taken from the boomer's pod in the refueling tanker, KC-135 tanker. Just in front of the refueling door there, you can see that round window, and underneath that round window was a little telescope for navigation, and that little telescope would slew around and find stars. So it was all computer driven. For that to work, the backseater had to tell the computer what day of the year we're flying, so the computer would know where the Earth was in its revolution. And then there was a very accurate clock put into the airplane, so it knew where the Earth was in its rotation. So the computer and telescope knew where to look for a star, and it would point, and then it would do a circular search until it found that star, lock on and measure the angle. So during the flight, our inertia navigation was constantly being updated by the stars. We didn't have any GPS back in those days. And most all airplanes back in those days did have an inertial navigation system, but the inertial navigation system was being updated during the flight by radio signals from the ground, VOR stations and TACAN stations. But we couldn't depend on the Russians to give us good radio signals for our navigation. So we used stars for updating the inertial navigation system. We get our full load of fuel back away from the tanker, light the afterburners, and it would take about 20 minutes to climb to our initial cruise altitude near 80,000 feet. We had a lot of missions along the northern border of Russia, keeping a close watch on the submarine ports along northern Russia, and keeping a watch on the nuclear-tipped missiles being loaded on those submarines. And you know, the shortest distance to attack America is from Russia would be over the northern pole area. So that's why they were along the northern border of Russia. Shortest distance across the northern pole of the Earth for the United States. So here, this picture is taken in the springtime. You see the Arctic ice breaking up. But it was just always really neat to see slight curvature on the Earth and how dark it was overhead, even though we're only 15 or 16 miles high. But you had the feeling of being at the edge of space, even though we're a long way from any orbit, of course. And there was no wind up where we were flying, so it was always really smooth and no turbulence at all where we were flying. Now, it's especially interesting flying along the northern border of Russia in the wintertime when near the Arctic Circle, when the day-night line was running almost east and west. So we weren't concerned with where night was because of our ASAR's camera, and our flight path might take us across the day-night line several times during the reconnaissance mission. One time, it was just a coincidence, my planned track crossed the day-night line 6 times in less than an hour. So in less than an hour's time, I'd seen 3 sunsets and 3 sunrises. Always really neat to fly during that time. That was the planet Venus. Then, when it was time to come back to our base, we descended, and then passing about 40,000 feet, we would start leaving the contrail. And this picture was taken by the B-38 near Beale Air Force Base as we were passing 40,000 feet. You can see the Blackbird's contrails flying right by Mount Lassen, north of Beale Air Force Base. And that was a volcano that erupted in the early 1900s. Put the landing gear down for landing. We flew final approach at 175 knots. It was not real hard to land. It was not nearly as hard to land as the U-2. The U-2 flight plane was really slow in the flare and had a lot of lift, and it was really hard to, and it was real susceptible to crosswinds. So the Blackbird was a lot easier to fly or land than the U-2 flight plane. So we touched down and deployed that big orange drag chute, which did us slow down in a hurry. Taxi into the hangar. It was always a great feeling of satisfaction after every Blackbird mission, because we had just flown the world's fastest, highest flying airplane. But best of all, we felt like we had just done something important for our country and for the cause of freedom. So it was always a great feeling of satisfaction after every Blackbird mission. Then after a couple of years of flying those missions, they asked me to become one of the instructors. So we had one trainer airplane. They built 2 trainers, but one of the 2 trainers was crashed in the 1970s. So from the 1970s until I retired, we just had one trainer. And that trainer airplane, with the instructor being in the back seat, and his cockpit was built up higher so he could see forward to demonstrate landings and also air refuelings. This very airplane is now on display in Michigan at the Kalamazoo Air Museum. They call that air museum the Air Zoo. They take really good care of it. And we have had Blackbird symposiums up there a number of times, and we'll do it again in 2027. So it's always a great honor to train a new pilot in the Blackbird. And when I say a new pilot in the Blackbird, every pilot new to the Blackbird already had about 10 years of high-performance jet experience like I had in the family. And here I had just instructed Jim Hossell on his very first Mach 3 flight. The other guys come out and congratulate him. Wing commander comes out, pins on his Mach 3 pin, this is my Mach 3 pin on my lapel that they presented to me after going Mach 3 for the first time. Really proud of Jim. He later became an astronaut and was really good to invite me to all 5 of his space shuttle launches down at Cape Kennedy. Always a real thrill to see that launch in person, especially if you have a friend sitting on the end of it. On our green flight suits that we would wear flying the T-38, these were our patches. And you see the word Habu, and the Habu was another nickname for the Blackbird. And it was given to us by the Okinawans, where we were stationed over in Okinawa. They thought that our long, sleek, black airplane with its flattened nose reminded them of their highly poisonous Habu snake. So they started calling us the Habu, and that name caught on. And so it became almost as well known as a Habu as it was the Blackbird. Then after a couple more years as a flight missions and then as an instructor, one of the 2 Blackbird test pilot positions came open down at Palmdale, and I'd always wanted to be a test pilot, so I applied and had a good record in the Blackbird along with them, and they noticed they still were looking at my aerospace engineering grades from Auburn much earlier. Anyway, I was picked to be one of the 2 test pilots, and we had 2 test RSOs. In the middle is Ben Rich, who took over the Skunk Works after Kelly Johnson retired. I really enjoyed the test work down there, testing new things, new systems and software for the airplane. Palmdale is real close to Edwards Air Force Base, which you see under the airplane there. Edwards Air Force Base was built on the edge of Rogers Dry Lake. And Rogers Dry Lake is a 10-mile long, natural hard surface. It gets about an inch or 2 of water during the wintertime, and then it quickly dries up for the rest of the year. And it's hard enough surface that you could land an airplane on it. So that's why Edwards Air Force Base has been the premier flight test center for our country since the 1940s. If you lose an engine testing an airplane, you can glide right down and land on that 10-mile hard surface dry lake. And they let us land on it just for practice. I got to land on it in the T-38 one time just for practice. So in the early 80s, they put black lines on the dry lake for the space shuttle to have something to line up on for the space shuttle's first flights. And then we would go out to Edwards, watch the shuttle land, and then a few days later go out and watch it taxi out on the back of that big 747. That's always a really impressive, awesome sight to see it taxi out, that space shuttle taxiing out on that big 747. Then sadly, after a couple of years flying test missions on new stuff for the airplane, Congress decided to retire the Blackbird to save money because there had been improvements in spy satellites and also unmanned drones. So to save money, they decided to retire the Blackbird. We were all really disappointed, of course, because we love flying the Blackbird and love its mission. But air museums all over the country wanted Blackbirds for display at their air museum, including the Smithsonian, and the Smithsonian wrote this letter to Secretary of Air Force Donald Rice, the Aerospace Museum at the Smithsonian. Dr. Harwick wrote this letter and requested that he direct the pilot bringing the airplane to the Smithsonian to set an official coast-to-coast speed record. And that would call the public's attention to what a great airplane it's been for our country for 25 years. So I was ordered to set a coast-to-coast speed record. This is my commander, Colonel Don Emmons, called me in and said, Ed, I want you and JTV to take the airplane to the Smithsonian and want you to work with the NAA, that's the National Aeronautic Association that monitors and verifies official records. Work with them and set an official coast-to-coast speed record for an airplane. And I'm giving you permission to fly at top speed Mach 3.3. Ordinarily, we're not allowed to fly it faster than Mach 3.2. So I had permission to cruise at 3.3. And he said, you can tell the news media later, you can tell the news media that you had just flown from sea to shining sea in just over an hour. So sea to shining sea, that's an important phrase, well-known phrase in America the Beautiful. So it got me thinking about one of my favorite hymns, America the Beautiful. Anyway, JT and I were extremely fortunate to be picked to fly that special mission to the Smithsonian. JT was really a great guy. I really enjoyed flying with JT. He was my test RSO. So our plan was, and we flew it as planned, take off from Palmdale March the 6th of 1990, fly out over the Pacific and air refuel, get a full load of fuel. The fuel was going to be really tight to fly all the way across the country, turn around, and then land at Dulles near the airport. So we planned it so that we could land at Dulles with the bare minimum required fuel reserve. So we didn't have enough fuel to cross coastlines at top speed, Mach 3.3, so I had to move the start climb to the east enough so that across the west coast at Mach 2.5, we'd get our top speed Mach 3.3 about 8 minutes later. And then passing Washington, D.C., I would pull it out of afterburner and start my slow down so that we cross the east coast at about Mach 2.5, make a sharp turn back toward Dulles and land with the bare minimum required fuel reserve. Now, the NAA establishes city-to-city records, and you would think a city-to-city record ought to be from takeoff to landing, but that's not how they do them. You pass the cities at speed, they get the time, destination at speed, get the time. So we were able to do 3 city-to-city records on that coast-to-coast flight because our great circle route from LA to DC passed these 3 other cities. Ben Ridge of the Skunk Works especially wanted us to do a Los Angeles to DC record, so that's why we crossed the coastline near Los Angeles and we did Los Angeles to DC record while we were doing the coast-to-coast speed record. So on March the 6th of 1990, JT and I briefed up our last Blackbird SR-71 mission. We were briefing at the wee hours of the morning as maintenance was getting our airplane ready to fly. We put on our pressure suits one last time, making sure my pressure suit's going to hold pressure properly and make sure my microphone and speakers are working and my helmet is fine. We taxied out at 4:15 in the morning Pacific time, which is 7:15 in the morning in Washington, where we're going to bring the airplane. Took off at 4:30 Pacific time. Flew up toward San Francisco. I remember seeing all the lights of the East Coast in San Francisco, and I was just thinking, man, how lucky can I be to get to be flying this Blackbird on a speed record flight, and all these people with their lights there down there sleeping. I just felt like I wouldn't trade places with anybody at the time. So we flew out over the Pacific and joined with a tanker, AC-135 tanker, and refueled out over the Pacific. Now, it was pitch dark out there that night. There was no moon, no horizon, but we had refueled at night many, many times. Got a full load of fuel, lit the afterburners, and it was still pitch dark when we lit the afterburners, so this picture was not made that night, but it gives you an idea of what our afterburners would look like to the tankers as we departed the tankers for our 200-mile running start toward the coastline. This is what it did look like as we crossed the west coast, and as we're going faster than a rifle bullet toward the sun. The sun is coming up rapidly, starting to get twilight already. And so it was bright enough, already bright enough at that point as we're crossing the west coast, that I could see the white ocean breakers all along the coastline of California. And it was still dark enough that I could see all the millions of lights of Los Angeles, and out to my left, I could see the lights of San Francisco 300 miles away, and all the lights of San Diego to my right, and the darkness of Mexico beyond that. So I'll never forget what a beautiful sight that was. So we're flying supersonic toward the sun, and the sun is up now as we're passing Las Vegas. You can see the Lake Mead, all of Lake Mead down there, and you can see the 1990 population of Las Vegas at the top of this picture. And then a few minutes later, we're going right by the Grand Canyon, America's Grand Canyon. Pass right by the Purple Mountain Majesties of southwest Colorado as described in America the Beautiful. Passed about 60 miles south of Pikes Peak, and it was the top of Pikes Peak where Catherine Bates was inspired to write that wonderful song, America the Beautiful, in the late 1800s. You see it out to the left about 60 miles away. Then a few minutes later, we were right over that fruited plain that she sang about, hundreds of miles of prime American farmland. It was a special flight, so I was having special thoughts, and I was looking down and I was thinking about all those thousands of farmers starting their day, getting ready to raise food that feeds most of our country and even enough food to export overseas. Thought about our brave pioneers that I read about as a boy, taking months to cross country that JT and I were crossing in just a matter of minutes. Thought about what a wonderful country we have, made great by the hard work and sacrifices and prayers of our forefathers. The eastern part of our country was undercast, so I didn't see many features in the eastern part that day. But JT and I just made sure we enjoyed one last view of God's earth from 83,000 feet. The slight curvature of the earth, the darkness overhead because we're above 97% of the atmosphere, bright band of blue on the horizon. And most of all, we made sure that we were going to enjoy our last few minutes of flying this marvelous airplane, the SR-71 Blackbird. Then when we crossed the East Coast, the Blackbird had just flown coast to coast faster than any airplane has before or since. 67 minutes, 54 seconds, coast to coast. And that record still stands now. Next month it'll be 36 years old now. So we're way past time for some airplane to break that record. Maybe some of you will be involved in that faster airplane. So we made that turn back toward Dulles, and we had enough fuel to land with the bare minimum required reserve, but they wanted me to make a couple of passes for the crowd there, so they had a tanker meet me en route to Dulles and give me just a little bit more fuel so we could make a couple of passes for the crowd at Dulles. Backed away from the tanker, descended down through the undercast, made our first pass. I was directed to make only 2 passes and only 1 low pass. So first pass was 800 feet. I knew they couldn't call that a low pass. So passed at 800 feet and then circled around for my low pass was at 200 feet close to the crowd, and lit the afterburner so the crowd could feel the power of those 2 big J-58 engines and see the beauty of those orange plumes out the back of that beautiful black airplane. You see the shock waves in the exhaust there. And that's the same picture that was on the front page of the Washington Post the very next morning, March the 7th of 1990. And it was a real nice article about how the airplane had served our country for 25 years. We touched down and deployed that big orange drag chute one last time. Got to slow down in a hurry. Taxied into the Dulles terminal just west of Washington, D.C. Somebody had hung a big American flag on the tower there I was not expecting that, but really appreciated that patriotic gesture from one of the tower workers. You can see the wind has got it inverted in this picture. Then our maintenance troops were there from Palmdale to receive the airplane, talk our wheels, and get the airplane ready for handover to the Smithsonian. I'll never forget the feeling of climbing out of the cockpit one last time. JT and I were excited because we just set some official airplane speed records, but mostly we were feeling sad about it because that was our last flight in the Blackbird. And that would be the last time that Blackbird would ever fly. So we were mostly feeling sad about it. Ben Rich was there to give us a big thumbs up signal. They had a plainside ceremony as we passed the airplane from the Air Force to the Smithsonian. Several short speeches. That's Dr. Harwood, who had written that letter requesting the coast-to-coast record and saying how much he appreciated having the airplane for display now. But Ben Rich with the Skunk Works and talking about what an honor it was to serve making the Blackbird and its importance for a country for 25 years. Then they presented JT and me with coast-to-coast speed record certificates, which we really appreciated, but we both know and knew that it's really the airplane's coast-to-coast speed record. We were just lucky to be the crew that day. Any of the crews had the skill to fly that flight. And Mom and Dad had driven up from Florence, Alabama to hug my neck there at those. So it's one of my favorite pictures. Mom and Dad are my heroes. Dad served 3 years of World War II in the Pacific as a Navy Seabee. And then after the war, he went to school on the GI Bill, became an engineer, and served with TVA for 35 years. Mom was a nurse while he was she went to nursing school while he was in the war. They got married right after he got back from the war. And was a nurse for a number of years. And then in her middle age, she went back to school and became a school librarian so that her schedule could match all her kids a little bit better. In 1969, my aunt and uncle were killed in a car wreck, and they took in four of my cousins, and I was already the oldest of 5. So Mom and Dad had us 5 and then 4 more. So these are real heroes here, Mom and Dad. And besides having wonderful parents, I had really good public school teachers in Florence. And a very active church youth group at Methodist Church, and an outstanding Boy Scout troop. Great Scoutmaster Ted Marley. So I just feel really fortunate to have grown up in North Alabama. Then we answered questions from the news media about flying the Blackbird. And then that night on TVs all across the country were short news clips about the Blackbird's last flight. And so we'll see if this video will
Be a victim of the Pentagon budget cutting, but the SR-71 reconnaissance plane is not going quietly. It was a sonic boom you heard in the San Fernando Valley this morning as John Marshall reports.
The story begins here. Lockheed's Advanced Development Projects, better known as the Skunk Works. In the early 60s, Kelly Johnson and a team of engineers set out to build a plane that would fly faster than a speeding bullet. And that it has, for 25 years. The story ended early this morning at Air Force Plant 42 in Palmdale. Lieutenant Colonels Raymond Yeilding and J.D. Beta put on their spacesuits for one last historic flight. Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound, coast to coast, Los Angeles to Washington. The SR-71, the Blackbird, can cruise at 2,200 miles an hour, 16 miles above the Earth, because its titanium skin can withstand operating temperatures of more than 800 degrees. Flying faster and higher than anything else, The spy plane has never been shot down. After takeoff, the Blackbird was refueled by an Air Force tanker plane, then pointed east as the two J-58 engines were cranked up to maximum cruising thrust. The sonic boom rocked the Los Angeles area just after 6 a.m. The SR-71 did everything it was supposed to do, arriving at Washington's Dulles International Airport 1 hour, 8 minutes, and 32 seconds later, shattering the old record. Average speed, 2,112 miles an hour.
But like every good thing, it must come to an end. So let me say and conclude by saying goodbye to this magnificent, sophisticated flying machine. Bye-bye, Blackbird.
John Marshall, Channel 4 News.
Brings back good memories, but you notice they gave the wrong time for the coast-to-coast record. They said 68 minutes and something. And the reason is as we were making our way back to Dulles, NAA gave the news media an initial estimate of our coast-to-coast record time. So that 68 minutes is something that is seen in the news that day and during the next several days. But they went back and looked at the tapes and decided that 67 minutes, 54 seconds is the correct coast-to-coast time. And so that's the official coast-to-coast record time. So it was really an honor to deliver the airplane to the Smithsonian. Then JT and I had to make our way back to our base in California. We had tickets right in the center of this big United Airlines 767. That 767's got 2 aisles, so it's just packed full of people. And our seats were right in the center of the airplane. And it was a good flight and all. And the service was nice, but gosh, it took 5 hours to get back to California. This picture represents the retirement of the Blackbird. And the Blackbird, these are our records. Coast-to-coast speed record, 67 minutes, 54 seconds. LA to DC, as we pass LA and they got our times in DC. LA to DC record is 64 minutes and 20 seconds. Kansas City to DC, 25 minutes and 59 seconds. And then St. Louis to Cincinnati, 8 minutes and 32 seconds. And that St. Louis to Cincinnati is the only one of the 4 records where we were at our cruise speed over that distance of that record. And so that gave us the highest average speed of the 4 records, 2,190 miles an hour. And the airplane is on display at the Smithsonian's Udvar-Hazy Center, west of Washington, D.C. It's real close to Dulles Airport. It's a really interesting museum. The airplane is displayed right in the center of the museum. Nicely displayed. And in the back, you can see the Space Shuttle Discovery on display there. And it's just full of interesting airplanes. They put J.T. Vita's pressure suit on display close to the airplane. And they put my pressure suit in the Aerospace Museum downtown close to the Capitol. It's up on the 2nd floor. So the Udvar-Hazy Center, full of interesting airplanes, and you can spend easily hours with all those interesting displays there at the museum. After the Blackbird, I'll just tell you quickly that I flew the C-20 for 5 years out of Andrews Air Base. We're flying VIPs out of Washington, congressmen and senators, ambassadors, cabinet members, first ladies. So all over the world, to wherever their duty required. So that was really an interesting assignment as well. And while I was doing that, JT passed away with cancer, sadly, 1992 at age 50. He was really a great guy. He was an outstanding RSO, and he had more time in the Blackbird than any other pilot or RSO in history. So he had 1,392.7 hours in the Blackbird. He had a wonderful family man, too. I still keep in touch with his widow, and his daughters and son. So a little over a year after he passed away, my dad passed away, and I decided to retire from the Air Force so I could get home more often to Florence and help Mom with things. So I was hired by Northwest Airlines out of Memphis, so I was based in Memphis flying the DC-9 for 9 years, and I really enjoyed being an airline pilot, enjoyed flying with the other Northwest pilots, and enjoyed flying the people where they needed to go and fly them safely. And then after 9 years in the DC-9, I got to fly the DC-10, and eventually had enough seniority to become, airlines go by seniority number, but when you're hired. So I finally got enough seniority to be the most junior first officer on this big 747. I really enjoyed flying it too. It too is an engineering marvel. Held 403 passengers and all their bags, and we could fly nonstop from Detroit to Japan. Just amazing airplane. 75 yards long, 4 big, huge engines, 57,000 pounds of thrust apiece. Here I'm flying with Stu Popwell, also from Alabama. It had a more modern cockpit than any airplane I'd flown before, so that was interesting for me to get familiar with the more modern electronics in the cockpit. Then Delta acquired Northwest and painted our planes Delta colors, so I got to fly with Delta colors before I retired. Here I'm standing right by the big wheels of the big 747. 747 has 18 wheels, so I guess you could say I retired on an 18-wheeler. So I really enjoyed being an airline pilot. Then after I retired, I still wanted to fly, so I bought this little airplane, this little Citabria, and it's a lot of fun to fly. The only problem is I have to pay for my own gasoline nowadays. Now here's a couple of futuristic. This is the non-flyable airplane that was built just for the movie Top Gun Maverick. So it's non-flyable, but in the movie it supposedly goes Mach 10. So it's just that's something for the future. And this Mach 1.7 airplane is being built in Greenville, North Carolina. It's supposed to be cruising at 1.7 and carrying passengers. And this is an artist's conception of what future airplanes might be. And drones are becoming more and more useful too. I don't have any drone pictures, but they're becoming more and more important for our national defense. I'd like to close with this picture on Veterans Day of 2013. Had my picture made with my buddy. Anyway, he was almost 100 years old when we took this picture, and he told me all about being in Pearl Harbor when it was attacked by the Japanese. He was on the USS Curtis. Here, this is the USS Arizona being sunk on December the 7th, 1941. He told me all about that day because he was there, and then told me all about his service with the Navy during the remaining of the war. And I said, Carl, we sure owe our freedom to guys like you. And he just paused and said, well, it takes us all. So I think that's really important to remember. It takes us all doing our not only our military jobs well, but any job that serves our citizens in any way, usefulness, plays an important part in making our country a great place to live. Takes us all. This is the real hero of the Blackbird story, Kelly Johnson. And I'm going to close with a 5-minute video, a tribute to Kelly Johnson. It's an unofficial video made by one of the Lockheed cameramen without permission. And he put this video together. It's a tribute to Kelly Johnson, and it's a pretty good little video.
Dear Kelly, you and I have never met. I'm not a former SR-71 pilot or RSO. I wasn't a member of your design team at the Lockheed Skunk Works or on the assembly line that built the Blackbird. Nor was I a member of the Air Force at Beale, Mildenhall, or Kadena, who kept the Blackbirds flying. I'm not even an airplane buff in the classic sense. I'm just a person that had the privilege of being around your SR-71 Blackbird, and it was an experience I will remember intensely for the rest of my life. There's just something about your Blackbird, Kelly, that words don't adequately describe. Anyone who has been near a Blackbird and felt its presence knows what I'm talking about. It's a feeling in your gut, and instantly you want to be part of it. Part of what I call the Blackbird family. Today, Kelly, you are being honored for your design work on the SR-71, and justly so. To me, the SR-71 is not only your greatest aircraft design, it is perhaps the greatest aircraft ever built. I've heard it said that you considered the Blackbird the most fascinating challenge of your career. No wonder. It was a design that was so advanced that everything that touched it had to be new. New manufacturing processes, new tools, new materials, a whole new approach. You built an operational stealth aircraft a decade before most of the world had even heard the term. It was a design so far ahead of its time that it retired before time could catch up with it. In times of crisis, the Blackbird provided 6 presidents with a unique and critical view of the world. The Blackbird served this country for just over a quarter of a century. In that entire time, it stood in a class of one. To me, the Blackbird is much more than a technical marvel. It's an airplane that gets inside you, an aircraft that causes the adrenaline to flow just by looking at it. Kelly, your Blackbird is the stuff dreams are made of. It's the model plane sitting in a young child's room, proof that everything is possible, that the sky isn't the limit. And it's the poster hanging on the office wall of a middle-aged engineer, testimony that yes, even in the real world, miracles do occur. The SR-71 embodies all that excites people about aerospace. Its crew seems part pilot, part astronaut. The Blackbird itself appears part airplane, part spacecraft. The typical Blackbird fan is a cross-section of America. It's your grandfather, your niece, your son. It's the wide-eyed young kid that buys an aircraft book at the National Air and Space Museum. It's the family that traveled hundreds of miles to an air show just to see a Blackbird in person. It's the people on the Air Force Base that stopped what they were doing to watch an SR take off. Everyone, every time, no matter how many times they'd seen it before. And it's the pilot who last flew the Blackbird 20 years ago, who has the look in his eye that says, I flew the best aircraft ever made. The look that can barely contain the desire to get in an SR just one more time and light the burners. When Blackbird 972 made its final record-setting flight to Dulles Airport, I watched the television with mixed emotions. This was the Blackbird's final flight. An aircraft that was the very definition of speed and power, of flying away. But my sadness was tempered by the knowledge that this plane would now truly belong to the nation, coming to rest in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Now millions would be able to do what I had done. Be near a Blackbird, be part of the family. Kelly, in the years to come, whenever I want to experience your airplane's majesty, I will remember the time I spent with your Blackbird, the smell of JP7 fuel, the feel of it on the soles of my shoes, the sound of an air starter wind up, the TEV ignite, and I'll put on the film that we shot during those incredible weeks in 1987. I'll watch it, feel it, be part of it again. Because in movies, Kelly, like in our memories, your Blackbird will fly forever. Congratulations, Kelly, and thank you. Devin Hawker, Assistant Cameraman, Blackbird, the movie.
Well, that's a really nice tribute to designer Kelly Johnson. This completes my briefing. I really appreciate you all coming out today. Okay, Dimitri.
So, we're going to have a Q&A. The way we're going to run this is, if you can, come up to the mic up here. Raise your hand first, and I'll point you out. You can walk up here just so we don't have like a line go too long or anything like that. I will start us off. If I can get this in here. So I remember you telling me once that the SR-71, that you never quite put it to the maximum throttle that you theoretically could have, right?
On takeoff and anytime we're accelerating, we go maximum. But at cruise speed, when we're at cruise speed of Mach 3.3, top speed of the airplane, still had throttle to go faster. It could have gone faster with the power. So on my last flight, and since Ben Rich wanted us to set a LA to DC record, I called up the Skunk Works and said, your boss would like for me to go LA to DC in less than an hour, but to do that, I'm going to have to cruise at Mach 3.5. That's faster than the flight manual limit. What do you think about exceeding 3.3 on a one-time last flight? The engineers did a several-day study and came and met with me personally and said, it's too dangerous to go faster than 3.3. The airplane was not designed to go faster than 3.3. It was never flight tested to be faster than 3.3. If you have an unstart faster than 3.3, we're not confident you can keep the nut pointed in forward. It'll pitch up and break apart. We would recommend don't go faster than 3.3. So JT and I looked at each other and said, okay, 3.3 is going to be fast enough. So at 3.3, we still had throttle available to go faster, but we didn't want to exceed 3.3.
Out of curiosity, if you were to put the throttle to the absolute maximum, how fast do you think you could have gotten it?
Well, it would be pure speculation, but I would imagine we could get to Mach 4.
Any questions? Joshua?
Anything at all?
You have a question?
I do not. But this is so cool. Everything about the Blackbird is just awesome. It's so cool that you were the one to set the record with your art. So it's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I was really very, very fortunate for the opportunity, for sure. Anyway, I really admire all of you for, it sounds like all of you are high-tech majors. So really admire you all for the hard work and study that you have to do, and I'm wishing you all the very, very best in your futures. Dimitri, do you have any more questions? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say, sometimes, because we're all engineering majors, right? We sometimes forget why we do what we do. We get so caught up in classes and our assignments, and we're sitting here thinking, and if we're doing dynamics or we're doing EGR 101, and we're wondering, why are we doing this, right? It's the worst thing ever. And then, every now and then you get reminded of what we're actually building and what we're actually doing. And it's always great to see that.
Kelly Johnson, in his autobiography, talks about how he always loved math and stuff. He said, when I take a family vacation, I usually take a math book with me, and I review my differential equations or calculus or whatever, just when he was doing a little reading. I thought that was pretty neat. Okay. Well, thanks again. I hope you all have a great weekend. Thanks for taking time out on a Friday afternoon to come listen to the program. And wishing you all the very, very best in your careers. And I'm in really no hurry if any of you afterwards, if you want to come up and ask me something while I'm putting my stuff together, it's fine. Thanks, Dimitri, for inviting me.
And thank you for coming. Thank you all for coming. I hope you all have a wonderful day.